So my name is Shelley McMahon. I'm the director of the Herbarium here. I'm going to just give you my very brief perspective on Richard. Then I'm going to describe the event a bit more, and then I'm going to turn it over to our MC, the inestimable Jim Malusa. So I want to first start, though, because I get the mic. So I want to start first with my perspective on Richard, and I promise I'll keep this short. Richard was incredible. He was precise. He was thorough. He was accurate. He held that to understand our impact and how we should proceed, we have to understand what we're impacting and thereby how we can more sustainably proceed. And so to me, his ethnographic work, his floristics work, and his new crops work are absolutely profound and profoundly interconnected and inspirational. So I reserve the right to share personal stories later, but I'll just give you a rundown of the rest of the event. So Jim will take it from here. We have a number of speakers lined up. Thereafter, we'd like to open the floor and we'll have an open mic session. We'll pass around a mic. We're actually going to pass around a clipboard so you can put your name down, and we'll make sure that you get a chance to speak at that. And then after we have a chance to share our stories, we'll invite everybody back to the Herbarium, which is really just a building right next door, but it's a bit of a winding walk. You have to go this way and that way. That's where the restrooms are. There are restrooms in this building, however, it's locked, but I can get you in. So, so if it comes up, and maybe when everybody is leaving to go over there, I'll try to open the door. So do reach out to George or me at any time if you need anything during this. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to our MC, Jim Malusa.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I'd like to start by saying I'm going to pass around this, and it's going to go down each row, and then you're going to put your name down if you'd like an opportunity to speak and share some memories of Richard afterwards. And Shelley's going to begin. So excuse me if I seem a little overdressed. Sue Rudman saw me and she thought, "You're a Mormon missionary." And it's a good thing she didn't know that actually I rode my bike here like this. So now I know that people are giving me extra room. And so it's an honor to be able to introduce these speakers with a little brief background in each of them. We're going to start with Silke. Silke Schneider, who's you should know is very, very fond of working with horses. She left home, left her native Germany right after high school to join a traveling circus to be with the Horse Act. And then later she joined a traveling theater group that ended up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then on a ranch, she trained an Arabian named Samir to follow the 1,200-mile historic Chisholm Trail. An incredible accomplishment that took her 7 weeks, and then brought her to Fort Worth, Texas, where she meets an Australian rancher, and wouldn't you know it, she ends up a cowgirl down under the equator. And lucky for us, and lucky for Tucson and for Richard, that the Biosphere 2 project brought her to Tucson to work with domestic animals there, and that's where she met Richard. And I can say that Silke made Richard very happy, and she continues to make the children of Silver City happy as a kindergarten teacher. Thank you for coming, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and what a special event. Of course, overwhelming to see so many of you who I haven't seen in a very, very long time. So since a lot of friends ask, well, how the heck did you meet each other? You're so different. I figured, well, I'm going to just give a brief speech about how Richard and I met, and then all his wonderful accomplishments. We will hear from all of you. So, Richard and I'm sorry, I'm going to read most of it because it's too overwhelming, and then I get sidetracked and it'll be way too long. So, Richard and I first met 28 years ago when Richard was giving a poetry reading at Biosphere 2, where I was working at the time. Between the poetry reading and us sharing our lives, there was an interesting few months of inching closer and closer, sort of an awkward courtship dance. I learned that Richard became a botanist at the age of 8, after having been a marine biologist, and that he raised alligators in his mother's bathtub as a kid, and many other stories. And his mother, yes, she told me that is true. He learned that I had run away with a traveling circus at the age of 18 before settling down in the Southwest to study animal science and education. I had moved from Biosphere 2 to the Tortolita Mountains with all my menagerie, including a pair of emus, large birds from Australia. A mutual friend of ours brought Richard out to my little farm, and we were sitting in silence to witness an emu chick getting ready to hatch. We found other excuses. No, I forgot the most important part, because Richard had left his little botanist hat behind, and I delivered it to his house in town. So here we start. We found other excuses to spend time together, such as dinners, hiking, camping, and field trips. Richard invited me to his 60th birthday party. He told me 39. And which I sadly missed because I was in Canada at a rare breeds meeting at the time, so we had our own birthday party, just Richard and me. The following summer, Richard visited me in Western Australia, where I was working at the time. We traveled the outback and had the most wonderful adventures, conversations, and despite our very different backgrounds, we always shared very deep common values. A year after we met, we moved to our beautiful new place in the Catalina Mountains, where many of you came to visit. And we were in awe about sharing our lives with all the plants and animals that came with us to our new home. We have been best friends, husband and wife, and soulmates for over 28 years. We went on many field trips together, mostly Mexico, and a lot of us, we met in Mexico, Alberto, Giela, and we were there visiting when the kids were still small. And Richard accompanied, oh, wait a minute here. Yeah, Richard came to some of my endurance horse rides that I did in those days. And we were both amazed and enchanted by each other's so different worlds. I had no idea it could take hours to explore a very short trail in the mountains and deserts. A long time. And the treasures that could be found. Richard could not believe that us horse riders would trot at a fast pace over all those amazing treasures. Attending plant meetings with Richard and him attending horse meetings was very amusing at times and broadened our fascinations with our world so different yet so much the same. In 2007, Richard and I moved to Silver City, just in the mountains of Silver City, outside Silver City, next to the Gila National Forest. We completely, totally fell in love with our quiet home, well, except the roosters, dogs, horses, coyotes, bobcats, birds, etc. Hiking and riding right out the door, Richard being able to do his work without air conditioners with a fresh breeze. He really, really fell in love with our place in Silver City and didn't even want to leave anymore. And we had to get him away to the Aho meeting. That was the last meeting that before the COVID hit. Actually, see, now I'm going to get distracted, but the COVID year was one of our best times because I had to work from home, and Richard was working from home, so we spent most time during the whole COVID time, and we could still enjoy the outdoors, and we had a really good 2 years during the COVID, I hate to say. Richard had the amazing gift of getting the younger generation interested in the natural world, as lots of you know. And many of you were students, colleagues, and friends. We are all looking forward to hearing your stories. And I just wanted to end my little presentation by saying that Richard climbed the highest mountains, hiked in the hottest deserts, and dived in the deepest oceans to find just that little plant or piece of the puzzle to complete one of his many papers and books. See, I'll hold it together here. We must all continue to find the puzzle pieces to contribute to our biosphere and to help the healing. And Richard's legacy will live on forever. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is going to be Sue Brutman. Sue came to Tucson in 1983, but if you ever talked about Arizona history with Sue, you'd swear she arrived in 1883. And this is because during her 19 years, she worked as a plant ecologist at Oregon Pipe. She did all these oral histories of folks out there, just in her spare time, I suppose. Folks like Marion L. Gray and George Potter. And then she retired and came to Tucson. She teamed up with Bill Broyles to write the book I enjoy very much, the Cowboys and Cowgirls. Yes, that's it, around Ajo, Arizona. At the same time, Sue and Richard completed a 21-chapter flora of the Southwest Arizona, for which she was paid $0. Most recently, Sue's gone crazy recording images of plants with a scanner, and through the Native Plant Society, she has recently gifted to the public hundreds of gorgeous scans of plants. She's also a fierce defender of wildlands, just like Richard was, and today I think Sue's going to read a little bit from it at me. Sue?
I think there's something about this podium that makes you verklempt. All right, so we had a little memorial for Ed Abbey at the Sonoran Symposium last month, and I was asked to read something from his book called Cactus Country in 1973, and I went through it, and I was amazed to find something in there about Richard. So I'm going to read you an abridged part of chapter 6 called Down to the Sea of Cortez. And now we come to one of the largest remaining wild areas in the Sonoran Desert, the northwestern corner of Old Mexico, where the desert meets the Gulf of California. As my guide, I invited my friend and neighbor Richard Felger, a botanist who has specialized in the ethnobotany of northwestern Sonora. We made our preparations, and one January day got off to an early start. All day long, Felger and I rattled through the desert. We passed a few small rancherias where mesquite branch corrals, idle windmills, and small mud huts attested to the part-time presence of our fellow man, but we saw no one. The road we were following brought us to a fishing village called Puerto Libertad, inhabited by a half-dozen families of Seri Indians, and on occasion by American tourists and fishermen. After a few miles, we turned off and took a seaward trail to inspect the beach and gulf. Oh, someone has something to say. While Felger was inspecting the plants at a natural water hole half-mile from the beach, Abby takes a walk. I climbed the ridge and descended through hot sand to a splendid beach. The beach curved in unbroken crescent north and south, perhaps 15 miles long, empty of any human company. Felger caught up with me and we walked the strand and hunted souvenirs. We found shark eggs, sand dollars, kelp, starfish, rotting sponges, the shell of a fiddler crab. I looked inside. Nobody home. Better to make camp for the night in the deep in the cactus land. Bats flickered through the dusk. A horned owl hooted from the top of a nearby carton. Coyotes and bobcats, skunks and badgers, serpents and tarantulas were all on the prowl for supper. We fried our bacon, warmed up our beans, drank our wine, and slept. For several days and nights, we lounged along that marvelous shore, between the desert and the sea, under the intense sun and splendid light, unknown mountains behind us, equally unknown mountains floating against the sunsets across the Gulf. I walked for hours on the golden beach, swam in the cold, clear salt water, wandered through the cactus forest. It is the kind of place where you can do absolutely nothing for days on end and only wish you could do even less. When time came to leave, we drove down the coast road to Kino Bay. I thought of the wilderness we had left behind, open to sea and sky, joyous in its plenitude, perfect yet vulnerable, unaware of what is coming, defended by nothing, guarded by no one. And the last little paragraph I selected because it includes an ending, and I think Richard would have preferred his ending to be this way. Bull Pasture is one of the few places in Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument where the visitor can see a bit of nature in its pure state. Here the grass grows knee-high, the agave, the yucca, and ocotillo flourish, and the flowers during the spring and summer months, if the rains and temperatures have been propitious, brighten the fields with acres of color. The light seems a little more dramatic here than anywhere else in Oregon Pipe. The sun rises, the sun sets, the moon rises, the stars a little more brilliant, and the air is almost always clean and good. There is something sweet, calming, and benign in the general stillness, a quiet, never disturbed by any sounds more harsh than those of the wind rushing through the tall grass, the music of falling water, the scream of a hawk. We have few places like this remaining in our poor, pillaged, squandered, ravished Arizona. There are not many that a man or woman could find better for a last long walk under the sun and sky, through the wind, and into the earth.
Thank you, Sue. Our next speaker is Mark Dimmitt. And Mark Dimmitt's the only person that I know who's worked at the Desert Museum longer than my wife, Sonia, who's now been there for 36 years, but Mark was there longer. It's not a stretch to say that Mark is famous for his horticultural magic. I think was your words, you say you like to mess around with gene pools, like that? He certainly does. And one of his favorites is an adenium he calls Crimson Star. And this plant eventually became the darling, not of Tucson, but all of Southeast Asia. Everyone was growing it. Locally, you'll see one of his creations most everywhere. It's the gorgeous and thornless Desert Museum Palo Verde. In an interview Mark once provided the best description I've ever heard of plant collectors. He said, "I strongly suspect that the plant collecting bug is an abnormality similar to alcoholism, gambling, and other obsessive compulsive disorders. It isn't recognized as a psychological disorder because no one has ever asked for help."
My story with Richard goes back a long way. I hope I don't get distracted between the two stories that I want to tell. The year was 1967, October. It was my first week as a graduate student at UCLA. I was assigned a dark, windowless basement office And even though I was a zoology major at the time, I had already a substantial plant collection. And I decided to bring with me to that dark office a rare orchid called the butterfly orchid. And I was growing it, I had been growing it in my dorm room in college under a banker's lamp, you know, those little things with an 8-inch fluorescent bulb in it. Well, about my 4th or 5th day there, I was arranging my books that I brought with me, and I heard a voice from behind. "Is Phil here?" And then, without any pause, "Oh, that Oncidium papilio won't grow here. It needs more light." Two things happened immediately before I know who this guy was. One, I was amazed that he recognized my rare plant and identified it by its scientific name. And I told him I'd been growing it like that for years. And he was impressed that I was able to grow this thing. That was the beginning of a friendship that lasted more than 50 years. At the time, Richard was senior curator of botany at the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History. He hired me that summer to be his herbarium assistant. I didn't know anything about real botany. Well, everything I learned about plants was trial and error. So he taught me how to press plants, which we did for about 2 weeks. And then he said, "We're going on a collecting trip." So I thought we were going to go away for a weekend to the Santa Monica Mountains or something and collect. Well, it turned out this was a trek up the Pacific coast all the way to the Canadian border and back. And that was the first time I realized that plant presses could be more than 6 feet high. I also learned that Richard had a number of what was called personality quirks. He could be really difficult to get along with. And after spending 3 weeks in a car with him most of the time, it's amazing one of us didn't kill the other. But by the time we got back, I realized that this guy has an incredible source of knowledge. And even though he was a master at using people to his advantage, it became pretty obvious that if you stuck with him, you were going to learn a whole lot. And in 50 years, I can't believe how much I learned from Richard. Well, by the time I finished graduate school, I finished my master's degree at UCLA, Richard had already moved on to Tucson to be a research scientist at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. He is the reason that I got my dream job there in 1979. Richard didn't last long there either. He had a habit of getting fired. In this case, it was largely because, as I understand, it was largely because he was hired to be a Sonora Desert botanist, and he was devoting most of his time to sea turtle conservation in Michoacan. And the director didn't like or understand that, and Richard had to move on somewhere else. One of Richard's main enduring qualities, as Sue pointed out, is his thoroughness, his accuracy, and his incredible dedication. And I learned that on another collecting trip that happened in 1983. There was a very rare plant known only from Nakapuli Canyon. And at the time it was in the genus Macrosiphonia. Now it's called a Telosiphonia. He heard a report that this plant was also found on a microwave tower called Cerro Las Avispas in the Sierra Libre. I've seen it recorded as the Sierra Baviso too. I'm not sure if that's the synonym or two related ranges. Anyway, he really wanted to go collect it. This thing flowers during the peak of the summer monsoon. A lovely time to go to central Sonora. And as it turned out, both of us had meetings we could not avoid on Friday and Monday. And it was that way far in the future. So we said, well, let's just go for the weekend. So we left Tucson about 10 o'clock at night, drove all night to get there at dawn so we could work in the cool part of the day. Well, we spent the entire day on Cerro Las Avispas collecting plants, including the Telosiphonia. Collected until about sunset, drove to a hotel, ate a couple of tacos, went back to the room, and pressed plants until midnight. We went to sleep at midnight, got up at 4 a.m. to go back to the mountain. and collected another day until about 5 or 6 p.m. and then drove home. In 2 days, we put in a 40-hour work week. And that was pretty typical of Richard. He was a truly phenomenal guy. When he decided to do something, he found a way to do it. And I think that's a good place to stop. He was an incredible botanist, and ethnobotanist, and ethnozoologist, and oh yeah, a poet. Amazing man.
Our next speaker is Alberto Alvarez Montiel, and Alberto is a native Sonoran, born in Hermosillo, and after he received his PhD from the University of Cambridge, he returned to Hermosillo, thank goodness. There he's a professor at the Instituto de Ecología at UNAM, where he continues his research as a population ecologist and a desert botanist. With David Yetman, Kevin Holting, and Michael Sanderson, he wrote the best book ever on the saguaro, and then they had the good sense to name it the saguaro cactus. He's also a regular attendee at Bill Broyles' annual Desert Rat Party, and this is the party that was also a favorite of my mother-in-law, Rosa, and she was always absolutely charmed by the handsome Alberto. So charmed, in fact, that she considered him, and she meant this as the highest compliment, the Julio Iglesias of Sonora. I don't know if Alberto sings, but I'm glad he can make it sing.
Well, you can see the real thing. It's very difficult to add on what it been told about Richard. The only thing I can tell you is that I met Richard well before most of you. Even before Edward Abbey, not before Mark. However, when I met Richard, I didn't know at the time it was Richard. I was on a trip arranged by my school, going to Nacapule Canyon, and there was this young American in a ranch with a stack of cardboard and newspapers and presses and everything, and he was young and he had plants all around, and he was not telling us anything. He didn't speak much Spanish at the time. Later, he tried. Well, this young American started chatting with sign language with us, asking about plants and cacti, and asking us about the Bay of Guaymas, because it was in Guaymas. I was living in Guaymas at the time. I don't know if it is predestination or whatever, but I met Richard under a sky where 17 B-25 Mitchell bombers were roaring above our heads, going to land in the newly built airstrip in Los Algodones Beach in Guaymas. And we all look at it, and Richard kept pressing plants. Well, the last time I saw Richard, he still complained about the creation of that airstrip in Los Algodones, saying that it was a desecration of the deserts. In the 1970s, I missed him for a couple of days when staying at the Desemboque with the Mosers. And it was until 1991 that I met him in person. And we started a very close friendship then. And I started learning, first to press, of course. And he gave me a crash course on pressing plants, because he said, you ecologists don't understand what a good specimen is. You have a crop of specimens. Do come. And he started showing me how to press properly a botanic specimen. And we spent alternating between readings at his house, learning from him about plants and landscapes. He knew Sonora much more than I still know more. at his Sam Hughes house. And we stayed there for days on trips that just longed for long periods during summer and winter times. Richard was eccentric and peculiar, but was the most generous person in the botanical realm. I learned so many things from him. He gave me books, he gave me advice. He took advantage of me and saying, draw this map, do this, go there. And I really appreciate that, and I miss him very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. Our next speaker is Sue Carnahan. He's a terrific hiker, a great photographer, and living proof that you don't need a formal background in science to flourish. After degrees in English and creative writing and a career as an editor, she has become an authority on the flora of southern Arizona and northern Sonora. And how did she do that? Well, a visit in Nacapule Canyon in 2011 led her to send photos of some plants to Richard, and he swept her away. A decade later, Sue and Richard and Jose Sanchez Escalante, they published the flora of the Cañón de Nacapule, Sonora, Mexico. Thank you, Sue, for your past and continuing contributions.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks everyone for coming out today. It's wonderful to meet new people and see old friends and hear stories. I didn't have a lot of the field work experiences with Richard that many of you did. My first contact with him was, again, sending photos, as Jim said, that I had taken in Nacapule, and I was enthusiastic and had a digital camera, and I just took photo after photo and said, what the heck are these plants? And Richard was so helpful and so accurate and so quick to respond. And he said, keep these. We might update the flora of Nacapule. And sure enough, we did eventually with Jesus Sanchez. And it led to a broader collaboration on the flora of the Guaymas region in general that Richard had been working on since high school. When he first traveled through the Guaymas region on his way to Alamos with his high school teacher and her boyfriend who was studying poor wills in Alamos. And he got a taste of the Guaymas region. He loved Alamos as well, but he got a taste of the Guaymas region, and that just set him on a lifelong course to do the flora of that incredible area. And sure enough, it was one of the last things he was working on up until August, September, October of 2020. I made, in sending all those photos to Richard, I made perhaps an early tactical error telling him I was a copy editor by trade. And he tested me out on a few things that maybe didn't matter very much, and then he liked the fact that I would give him all sorts of feedback. And then soon after that, I was getting flora chapters, grant applications, blurbs for talks at the Native Plant Society, poems, even a letter to the local tax authority. I wanted to make sure it was worded correctly. So, Richard loved to be edited. He loved it. And I, as a copy editor, I mean, I wasn't a copy editor forever. I've had a checkered career, but most writers don't like to be edited. They want to make sure their stuff is right, but they don't really relish being told, fix this is awkward, this is whatever, wrong. Richard loved it. Now, don't correct him on the botany. That took a lot of years before I could correct him on any botany, suggest a correction to the botany. But he loved having his prose made better. And it was really a pleasure learning from him and working on documents. And most of my interactions with Richard were via email, as you can imagine, which he used the way people use a smartphone to text. He would bang out 4 words, bang out another 12 words, bang out another 18 words, and these were email after email after email. And that was the friendship that we developed, the working relationship. I had one occasion to be in the field with Richard, and that was, of all places, in Nacapule Canyon. October 2015, it was his last trip to Sonora. The occasion was the Next Gen Symposium, and he was receiving a Lifetime Award. And I think it was sort of pulling teeth for Ben to get him down there, but he went. And he stole away from some of the proceedings to be in Acapulco. And I was there with some friends, some other botanistas, some of whom are here. And we tromped up and down the canyon with Richard, and it was just marvelous. And it's also my first and only experience being someone's field assistant, which I didn't know I was going to be. Grab this, get that, go up there, we need that, bag this, hold that. And it took a little negotiation at some point because I said, Richard, I think I need a photo of this. And it didn't occur to him I need to take the photo before he yanked it out of the side of the hill. We got some photos, a lot of specimens, a few new records for the canyon, which was fun. If you've been to Acapulco Canyon, you know that at the west end of the canyon there is a rope and plank ladder that goes up about, I don't know, I don't like heights, so maybe it seems like 50 feet. It's probably 15 feet. Richard was 81. I was a lot younger. We both climbed it. He said, no photos. I took one anyway, which is flattering. I never showed him, but... and at the very top, being October, it had rained in the summer, it was kind of a wet slope. We were literally on our hands and knees at one point, kind of inching our way along the slope, and right in front of our noses was this little mat of sedges, about 2 inches tall. And he said, grab those look important. So I did manage to get a couple of photos in, and then I bagged up a bunch of the sedges. And they turned out to be new for the canyon. Half-chaff sedge, formerly Lipocarpa, now in the Cyperus genus. But that was Richard, you know. We spent those 2 half days wandering around in that canyon. He was greeting the palms, the figs, the coca trees, like old friends. But he didn't ignore the other plants. He was paid just as much attention to the desert broom growing in the middle of the canyon, to the Waltheria, which when he first documented it was just a couple of plants and now it was throughout the canyon. He was interested in the whole thing. How did it all work together? How much Malinus repens was actually growing there? Were the ocotillos, the 3 species, all still growing in the canyon? And they were. He really paid attention to everything that was happening there, not just the keystone plants, not just the amazing ones, the endemics, the rare ones, the statuesque ones. He loved it all. You know, we needed the little euphorbias, and we needed a piece of a tree, and we needed some desert broom, and I learned just watching him how he would move through an area and pay attention to it all and give it its attention. And that's how he worked on floras, that's how he paid attention to plants in general. All of them deserved attention. All of them deserved to be photographed, documented, written up, added to a key, added to a flora, added to a field trip. And that was really amazing to me. So there are a number of people, just a handful of people that I happen to correspond with about this event who could not be here. And I know that they are thinking about Richard today and they send their regards. One is Felipe Molina, Richard's co-author for the UMA Ethnobiology that is in preparation. One is Jesus Sanchez and his wife Lupita, who could not be here today. Jesus is co-author on the Nacapule flora and the forthcoming Guaymas flora. Lloyd Findley from San Carlos, fish and whale researcher, sends his regards. Russ Kleinman from New Mexico. He has a good excuse that Richard would approve of. I think he's in Thailand right now, so that's a good excuse. Jim Baumel, who worked on Hymenocallis, the spider lilies, and corresponded with Richard. Gil and Troy Gillenwater, I don't know if they are here. They were going to try to come. They went on many kayak adventures with Richard, but they send their regards. And all these people and all of you have Richard in your thoughts, and all these other people are missing him as we are. So thank you, Richard, for bringing us all together.
Thank you, Sue. Some of you may have noticed that the average age of our speakers today is a tad over the half-century mark. And if you're wondering who's going to carry the torch, yeah, the answer is Ben Wilder. I met Ben when I was a grad student, when he was a grad student, I'm sorry, working with Richard he was working with Richard on the flora of the islands in the middle of the Gulf of California. And I was really astounded by the scale of this project that Ben had taken on. And not only did he finish it, but he published a marvelous account of this in 2012. And that was written by Ben and Richard, along with Humberto Romero Morales, and it's called Plant Life of the Desert Archipelago. It's filled with wonderful maps, and photographs, and beautiful accounts from field journals, which are my favorite part. And a book like that would be anybody's crowning achievement, but Ben is just getting going. He's now the director of the Desert Laboratory on Tucson Hill, and his latest accomplishment, co-authored by his wife Jennifer Patton, is a very cute and curious baby boy, Eli. Ben, where are you? There you go.
I'm not sure who Jennifer is, but my lovely wife Erin and I have a beautiful baby. Well, hello friends. It's great to be here with you. And as Sue said, Richard's bringing us together. Shelley, George, Jim, thank you so much for creating this space for us. And as Richard told me when the last time we spoke, he said, have a memorial that I would want to be at. So I think you guys did a great job with that. On the early morning of October 31st, 2020, with a full moon, as we have tonight, Richard left us. It happened suddenly. No time for preparation, as if one could prepare for such a thing. As we all know, Richard was not one for goodbyes, though I thought he would be with us in person for far longer. I am lucky enough to have been invited by Richard into the club. You are all members too. This is a core group of people who knew and know how special Richard was and truly is. A truly unique, gentle, loving, perceptive, irreverent, genius, ornery, particular, impatient, meticulous, careful, diligent, focused, and infinitely creative human. Richard Felger is one of the greatest desert botanists to have ever addressed this spiny topic in any region of the world. He understood humans as a species over a long period of time. With a relentless pursuit of detail and accuracy, he decoded the world of plants and people in an approachable fashion preserved in dozens of books and hundreds of papers and poems, which will stand the test of time. From his earliest contributions, he has worked to open the rest of our eyes to the recognition between people and the living world around them. He had perception few hold. He gave those around him who really got to know him so many gifts. Working closely with Richard was not always easy, though I quickly realized that those idiosyncrasies are a distraction from the caring and wonderful person he was at his core and all he offered in his teaching. He taught me how to be a scientist, a writer, a field botanist, how to press, an ecologist, an interviewer, don't ask leading questions, a grants getter, a friend, a teacher, and explorer. He taught me that life and work are to be fun, purposeful and meaningful, but fun. His gifts will last my lifetime. Appropriately enough, I met Richard here at the University of Arizona Herbarium. I was 19 years old and had recently visited Isla Tiburon for the first time and came back asking questions of plants. What plants occur there? What goes here? Everyone I talked to in short order told me I had to talk to Richard. What plants occur on Isla Tiburon? I tentatively asked Richard in the herbarium at the encouragement of Ed Gilbert on that fateful day. That was the right question, it turned out, and was Richard's version of the pseudo-magical initiation ceremony, was what he referred to as the coming-of-age exams to finish his tests of academia. He quickly said, "We don't know, and why don't you do it?" Taken aback at such an offering and a staggering undertaking, I asked my dear friend and grandfather figure, Ray Turner, to tell me a bit about this Felger guy. Is this something I should embark on? Ray replied succinctly, "This is the opportunity of a lifetime." And as in nearly all things, Ray was right. The memories that come to mind clearest are weekends in the herbarium, combing through all the records of the Midriff Islands collections, and lunches and tea with John and Charlotte Reeder. Our near-death experience, or Shackleton night, as Richard called it, adrift for over 12 hours in a panga in the middle of the Gulf of California in December, with no gas, or radio, or phone. Richard just on the other side of a bout with pneumonia. Our lives saved by the winds. The incredible work ethic and deluge that Sue referred to of emails, with an intention to detail that is an incredible model of how to do it right. Landing on the rugged west coast of Isla Tiburon and having to navigate an undercut rock cliff 10 meters above pounding waves, Richard insisted that he's not walking that and that he can swim it. I grew up next to the ocean, Ben. It took me over 20 minutes to convince him not to do that. Having to tell my mom that she just needs to keep letting him invite people to our book release party at my parents' house when the guest list far exceeded 100 people. Pressing plants with Umberto and Richard on Isla Tiburon under a giant ficus palmeri on a hot May afternoon on the island's eastern Bahada. Dancing around buzzworms, or rattlesnakes, fat on non-native rats as we ascended Isla San Pedro Martir to establish permanent cardone plots. His last words to me, "No more changes." The book, forthcoming Flora of the Guaymas region with Sue and Jesus, is done. Richard, we've listened. Being able to host his reading from 10,000 Years of Field Notes, his memoir at the Desert Laboratory, a night full of friends, wonder, and insight. Thanksgiving dinner on Isla Tiburon when I prepared a pork shoulder and marinated by my father. Richard's review, cosmic. Teaching me the names of palms in the San Francisco Botanic Garden because they are important to know. Hearing a story, such as, first I was a marine biologist before I became a botanist when I was 8. Or I had 3 pet alligators that went to the zoo when I went to college. Or I drag raced the Countess of Suffolk, her and her Ferrari, me and my Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing in Aber Valley. Trips in upstate New York with Allen Ginsberg and Timothy Leary. And to each of them, me thinking, wow, and okay. And then months or years later, having the opportunity to talk with people, and that stories not just corroborated, but learning that Richard shared were just pieces of much larger tales. Getting an email or having a phone call with Richard, and him sharing a piece of information just meant for me. You're not to be shared with anyone. And then after weeks or months of guarding that secret, realizing that everybody else in the Richard Club had also been told that exactly. I could keep going on. After Richard's passing, I had the opportunity to be in the great star dunes of the Sierra del Rosario, the center of the universe. As a cool season storm was moving through, Aaron and I were out in the dunes, and I finally let the emotion of his departure in. The sun burst through the clouds, splashing light on the dunes and the Sierra. Golden light pouring over the sand, the Sierra luminous gold. A double rainbow arching over the Rosario, captured in the image in your program. I didn't, and I still don't want to have to say goodbye. And I know in so many ways, I don't have to. Thank you. wanted to also share that at the recent AHO meeting of the ISDA International Sonoran Desert Alliance, an organization that Richard supported through his life, and as Zoka mentioned, was his last time at a conference, and the last time I was with him, and I think many of us were in person. And they recognized him this year with their Julian Hayden Lifetime Achievement Award, which I accepted that afternoon on his behalf and on Zoka's behalf. For Richard Felger, the man who cuts the head off plants, for his work understanding, documenting, protecting, and loving the Sonoran Desert and its people. And I should say this is the first time that I've seen the Histeri name, Eekatamting, translated into Atam. So just want to recognize that award and among many others that will continue to this day. So anyway, thank you all.
So I go back really far with Dick. We were both in graduate school at the U of A in the early 1960s. And I had a household near the university. I cooked dinner at the same time every evening. I had 3 little kids and lots of dogs and cats. And Richard would show up just about dinner time at least 2 or 3 times a week. And that went on for a couple of years. And then at that time we had a lot of friendships in common with poets from the Poetry Center and with other botanists. We had wonderful trips to the Pinacotes and to Nakapuli Canyon with Joe and Marcel Crouch and with the director of the Desert Museum. And I think that that's where we met Dick, but I'm not really sure. In any case, I moved to New Mexico, and when I left Tucson, I had a bobcat. The bobcat had been given to me by the guy who ran the Desert Ark at the Desert Museum, and took him on actually he was a tiny baby, but what the Desert Ark did was go around to schools, and that's what would have happened to Dangerous Dan McGrew if I hadn't been given him. So he was a total pet. He slept in the bed with me and my first husband. He actually, after my first daughter was born, he slept in the bed with her. And I thought, what am I going to do with this totally domesticated cat when I leave and move to New Mexico where I can't have him? And Richard said, oh, I'll rent your mother's guest house and I'll take care of McGrew. And he did for several years, and he did it to perfection. And this was somebody who I felt was not particularly fond of animals, but something happened after he met Silka, and I wanted to say that she has a huge amount of credit for modifying some of his personality traits, which have been mentioned here tonight, and particularly for affirming him as an animal lover beyond alligators. So thank you for that, Silka, and congratulations on those almost 30 years of a close friendship which benefited not just you and Richard, but lots of us.
And next on the list here is Bill Broyles. Bill, you want to come up, or you want me to bring you this?
I'll come up there.
Here he comes.
I happen to have seen a Felger just outside my office window, so this picture of my Sue means double to me. I'll read something real quick for you, because when I first heard about Richard, I heard these terms like rude, abrupt, focused, driven, angry, and I never found him to be that way at all. And I had to laugh a couple of years ago when at holiday time, because my wife and I sent him a holiday card with us feeding a giraffe at the San Diego Zoo. And later I learned that as a kid, Richard had collected cycads, special palm-like tropical plants, And at his home in Southern California, he had built quite a collection, 100 or so of them, different species, back when such collections were quite rare. And then in 2015, when I sent him this holiday card with the giraffe, feeding the giraffe, most folks would have written back and said, you know, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year or something, but not Richard. He wrote back, Dear Joan and Bill, all the best to you. At first I thought you both were in Africa, but I see Washingtonia robusta and Phoenix canariensis in the background, so you must be visiting your long-necked friend at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Park. When I was 12 years old, my dad bought me a membership at the San Diego Zoological Society. And when my parents sold the big house that we grew up in, my 100 or so cycad specimens, large and small, went to the San Diego Zoo. And some are still there, but they don't seem to remember me. And Richard will remember you always.
Thank you, Bill. And next I'd like to invite up Dale Turner to tell us a little story about Richard.
Yeah, so one aspect of Richard's life and personality that hasn't been touched on much is his interest in conservation. You know, he wasn't just collecting plants because he was crazy about plants. He cared about the landscape and the people, and that concept of conservation really drove a lot of his botanical and scientific work. He was an unsung founder of the Sky Island Alliance. All the initial board meetings were in his living room there in San Hughes. And then at some point I ended up working for him for a year. Other parts of my life kind of fell apart, and he took me in mostly because he needed somebody to manage the sort of like day-to-day realities of life. You know, the stuff that's not very interesting. So like, you know, he would wait until the bills from TEP came in the pink envelopes that were off the hour before he would, you know, think about writing a check. And then maybe it would be like next month or the following month. So he needed somebody to just like handle logistics, while he could focus on writing the flora of the Gran Desierto. You know, a pretty important project. So I stayed with him for a year, you know, not continuously, thank God. But you know, I learned about baling hay, you know, plant presses, you know, and then changing the cardboards in the plant presses. So I got to meet Jim Malusa and Mark Fishbein on a trip to Sierra Los Ajos, wherein I learned that the roof rack on a vehicle was the best place to dry giant plant presses. Trips to the Colorado River Delta with Ed Glenn, who was just starting the effort to bring back the Delta there. Richard was supporting that by, you know, figuring out, okay, what should be here prior to, you know, fields of wheat and cotton. But probably the happiest in the field that I ever saw him was in the Piacate, you know, the center of the universe. There was, I think it was a Native Plant Society field trip. Somebody had brought an RV out to Piacate. God knows why. But Richard was bound and determined to press some of those polycephalus, the barrel cactus with 100 little heads. So that name, the man who cuts the heads off plants, I just have this indelible image of him in the little kitchen space in that RV boiling these little barrel cactus so they could, peel the skin off and press them. And it looked like nothing so much as, like shrunken heads. And he was just kind of cackling over his powder. His perfectionism with plants has been noted. I will say that his keys to plants are probably some of the best in the world, because he not only had tremendous knowledge, but he would write the key and then he would use it on a daily basis with every trip. And I saw him come back from a field trip with a stack of plants, sit there with his laptop on his bed, and go through his key to see if these plants fit that key, and revise it constantly. So if you ever use one of his keys, you'll have a chance to appreciate it. It's not just good in the herbarium when you have all life stages. It's meant for field work. So he was famously difficult. I came to appreciate that, he had truly a big heart, and his interaction style with people was really an outgrowth of the fact that the parts of people's brains that are generally devoted to social interactions and skills was just full of plant names. Because you can pick up any little scrap of a plant in this part of the world, and he could tell you, the current scientific name, the antecedent scientific names, the English common name, the Autochthon common name, the Spanish common name, the Powhatan, the Yoemi common name, and then how they used it. He didn't have time for all that other stuff, I always appreciated that his messages ended, he was pretty consistent, at least for me, with the phrase, Pax et Prosopis, peace in Mesquite.
Peace in Mesquite. Thank you, Dale. That's so true. And I could listen to these remembrances like into the night, but I'm not sure everyone else can. So I'd like to tell you that we have 8 other speakers that would like to come up. So keep your comments a little bit shorter with that in mind. And Jim Felger, can you come up and speak with us?
Hello. So, like Bill, I had heard stories about Richard and various things, and like Bill, I didn't experience that side of Richard. But when I first met Richard, I was going to the herbarium a lot, and I was really interested in trying to learn how to identify grasses. And some of the grasses were a little easier, other grasses were quite hard. And I heard all about Richard, and that Richard, in addition to being a Sonoran Desert botanist, was great with grasses. So that was really my interest initially. Everything in life is kind of economy, so I was interested in meeting Richard. So he was there parked looking at specimens, probably euphorbias or convolvulaceae at the time for what he was working on. And I had a big stack of grasses I need to identify, and at the time I was struggling with these Aristidas or Threons, and not that I'm not still struggling, but at the time I really didn't know what these were. And Richard was there, so I kind of parked a few chairs over from him. There was silence, and then I was like, introduced myself, said hi. He kind of looked up at me in the corner of his eye, said hi, and then I said, hey, is there any chance you might be interested in looking at one of my Aristidas to give me a quick ID? And he said, yes, I can help you with that. And I thought, great, this is fantastic. And then he looked at me and he said, I have advice for you. I suggest you burn your specimens and live a happy life. And, so I stuck with it. And then I was like, oh man, okay. So then he smiled, and then he went back to his stuff, and I figured, okay, all right, that was a failure. I'll recover my ego and just see what I can do today. And then I realized that what I could do is when Richard was making a copy, not that I was stalking him at the Herbarium, but maybe I was. And when he would make a copy, there was like a 60-second window of opportunity where I could ask him a question. And if I could talk to him at that time, then he would look over and he would actually talk to me because he'd be waiting for the machine to process. So then I would ask him about grasses, and I kept asking him about grasses, and then after about 4 or 5 times at the copier, he finally said, and then I realized there's a common thread here with many of the speakers that he thought, oh, here's a potential laborer. So he said, would you be interested in co-authoring The Grasses of Sonora? And I said, well, I'd love to, but frankly, I'm just not qualified for that. And then he looked at me and gave an inspirational thing that was wonderful. And he said, you might not be now, but after we're done, you will be. Yeah, sure, I guess I'm in. And then I realized quickly what it was after about 1.5 years of spending my weekends at the Herbarium with low-grade headaches the entire time, and he would, half the time, he'd be parked next to me with his computer taking notes, and I'd have the grass in front of me with a microscope, and I'd have like an aristida dissected in front of me, and he'd be asking, how many nerves are on the lower glume? And aristida is very tiny spikelets, and I'd have it, and my hands were moving, and I'm trying to adjust it so I could see the nerves, and all of a sudden it would go flying what seemed like 3 miles, but it was about like 6 inches in the specimen. And then he, about 2 seconds after that, he'd say, how many nerves are in the lower glemma? And nerves on the lower glume, and I would say, give me a second, as I try to pull it back on there. But we became good friends after that. And then Richard, I always said, well, hey, if you're in town, you can stay with me. So he took me up on it, and I cooked for him. And that, I think, was the key, because I would always make him breakfast, I'd get him dinner, or make him dinner, healthy dinner, and I'd give him his space. He could disappear into the bedroom with his internet, and then I was kind of his go-to place to stay with, which was really nice, because over the years, I mean, he always remained a mentor, but we became good friends, and I really got to see what a caring, wonderful person that he was, with this incredible sense of humor. He really cared and loved for his friends and people in the community. And as our time went on, especially the last few years, he would really share with me, we'd talk about a lot of stuff, and he would share with me what was really important to him. And I can relate to where he was coming from on my own level, but Zilka was the most important thing to him. And he would always comment about how grateful he was to have her, and amongst everything else that was going. And this was before he started experiencing the health problems, because he was always very conscious of trying to stay healthy because he had so much to do. He wasn't ready to leave. He had a zillion projects to finish. But even before that, he would comment about, oh, I'm so fortunate to have Zilka. And then in that last year when he was struggling with some health issues, you know, he was so glad to have you. But we all miss Richard. So thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to invite David Yetman up to share his remembrances.
Richard, I would like for all of you to be brutally honest and ask yourselves and raise your hands if in the past you have entertained a desire to strangle Richard Felger. Now, I would like to ask the same, and the rest of you, how many of you are infinitely grateful that you did not? Just one indication of things that other people have certainly harped upon or mentioned or tried to deny. I invited Richard at one point to work on an ethnobotanical project with the Guadajillo people of southern Sonora, southwestern Chihuahua. He wanted to. And at the time, Paul Martin had laid upon me the responsibility of seeing to it that Gentry's Rio Mayo plants revision, which he had worked on for years, got published. and I knew virtually nothing about botany, but I said, yeah, I would. I had no idea how. It worked out, but that's the way Paul was. I was talking to Paul at the time, and I mentioned to him, well, I'm going to go up and spend some time with the Wadihiyos, who Gentry had done the original work with. And I said, Richard Felger's going with me. And Paul stopped and looked at me, nodded, and started laughing. Which is the only time I think I ever saw Paul Martin giggle. But it worked out until, and I think none of you can share my experience on this. We both had the unusual experience of a gun point at our heads while we were camping up in the wilds of the Upper Rio Mayo. And I also at that time had the gratification, which many of you wish you could have had, of very loudly telling Richard to shut up. Because he was quite vocal in his concern about what was happening. He was perfectly correct. But after that I realized, I went on and I completed the project without him. He was much smarter than I, prudent to stay away from that. But the treasure that he was in the field and as a person was utterly unmatched. He was an encyclopedia that oozed out for people that he was around. And it was not just the generosity of his very parsimonious person, but it was the way that he viewed the world and the knowledge that he had. It was not just his knowledge, although you would not know that sometimes, but it was the knowledge that the world needed to have to really make it a better place. And he had that deep down inside him, the desire to do that. And Richard wasn't just one of a kind. He was a gift of the universe to all of us who had the opportunity to work with him. And I think of other people who worked with him closely, for instance, St. Bill Broyles, who was here. And I don't use that term loosely, Bill. And any of you who know what Bill went through will understand that. But all of them experienced a lot of the same things, but at the same time came away understanding that he had been in the presence of a person whose ability to make the unintelligible intelligible was unmatched in anyone I have ever known, and I suspect for you who have known him will say the same thing about him. Richard, I miss you in your own peculiar way, and wish we could have had another couple of decades with you.
Looks like Tom Van Deventer is going to speak to us. Thank you, Tom.
Dave didn't finish his story. They were being robbed by gunpoint, and Richard was pretty freaked out. And David had to say, "Where's your wallet?" So he went to the truck and got that, gave the money to these two guys. And as they were leaving, Dave says, "Now what are we going to do? You have all our money. We can't buy gas." And these two robbers turned around and said, "How much do you need?" Gave them back $40.
That's all in the details. Now I'd like to invite up Carol Needhammer. Carol here, I can bring you the microphone as well.
In the interest of time, I'll pass.
Okay, Carol. And how about Beto Villa? He can certainly come forward. Oh, here he is. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I feel incredibly privileged and lucky to have known Richard and be a part of the Richard Felger Social Club. Richard was incredibly life-affirming and encouraging. and especially at a time when I really needed that. And we were working, or he asked me to review the herbs for the ethnobiology of the UMA. And I got back to him with several revisions and criticisms within 24 hours. And it was a crapshoot. I thought, well, he'll never talk to me again, or something will happen. Stick around and find out. And he calls me. I didn't even know that he had my phone number. And he basically said, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is exactly what I needed. And he then sent me the entire manuscript. And for about a month or more, I would receive 2-hour phone calls almost every day, 2 times a week. And that was a lesson in patience and being able to maintain multiple realities at the same time. I became involved with the plight of the Sonoran Desert toad, and I reached out to Mark Plotkin, a student of Richard Schultes, and a famous ethnobotanist, Amazonian. And I said, I am a student of Richard Felger, and I had mentioned also that Richard had passed away. And Mark Plotkin's first response was, we have lost such a unique individual. And I think by knowing Richard, we have become, by extent, indelible individuals on this planet. He always had little bits of stories that would leave you hanging. Like the one time he met Richard Schultes, and how did he take, there's a photo in his Seri Ethnoflora of Richard Schultes sitting in a vision circle. He just had ways of making offhanded comments that alluded to a very larger-than-life experience. I'll never forget that. But I won't go on. I want to close. I was going to read some of his poetry, but and I encourage you to do so. But I'm going to read an excerpt from Pablo Neruda's Bestiary, because I think it captures Richard's essence and all of our essence in the pursuit of knowledge and making the intelligible understandable to everyone else. If only I could speak with birds, with oysters and with small lizards, with the foxes of the Selva Oscura, with representative penguins. If the sheep would listen to me, the languorous woolly dogs, the huge carriage horses. If only I could talk things over with the cats. If the chickens could understand me. I have never felt the urge to speak with aristocratic animals. I'm not interested in the worldview of wasps or the opinions of thoroughbred horses. So what if they go on flying or winning ribbons at the track? I want to speak with the flies, with the dog who has just given birth. I want to have a long chat with the snakes. Sweet, loud, hard-voiced frogs. I've always wanted to be a frog. I have loved the pools and the leaves, thin as filaments, the green world of the watercress with the frogs, queens of the sky. The serenade of the frog rises in my dream and excites it, rises like a climbing vine to the balconies of my childhood, to the astronomic jasmine of the black night of the south. And now so much time has passed. Don't ask me about the sky. I feel I haven't yet learned the harsh-voiced idiom of the frogs. If this is so, how am I a poet? What do I know of the multiplied geography of the night? In this world that rushes and grows calm, I want more communications, other languages, other signs, to be intimate with this world. Everyone's remained content with the sinister presentations of rapid capitalists. I want to speak with many things, and I won't leave this planet without knowing what I came to find, without resolving this matter. And people are not enough. I have to go much farther, and I have to get much closer. So friends, I'm going to have a talk with a horse. Let the poetess excuse me, and let the professor pardon me. All week I'll be busy. I have to constantly listen. Thank you.
That was a beautiful choice, Baseball. And now I'd like to invite up Jared McKinley to the microphone. Thank you, Jared.
So I heard a few people mention that Richard, at least a while ago, wasn't that great with animals, taking animals in. But in the early 90s, he took me in. So I came here from New York to escape my feral childhood and pursue plants. And I was lucky enough to have met John Palting, who introduced me to Richard. And I was working out at Mesquite Valley Growers at the time. Didn't want to, but I needed a job and I could only talk about plants, so that's where I worked. And so he brought Richard to meet me, and Richard, there was a moment, I was showing him all the weird plants, and there's a moment where Richard had me in a corner and he's like, Jared, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a botanist. No, you don't. No, you don't want to be a botanist. I said, Richard, I know what botany is. I don't want to be a horticulturist. I want to be a botanist. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, this guy's such a jerk. And later, he was asking John Palting if he thought I would work for him. So I got roped in and even had the pleasure of living with him, which means cooking for him and cleaning and stuff. But he was incredibly generous with me and dumped homework on me, like books, which I devoured. But I've read most of the books that are in his library, probably, because he made me. And he had a list of people that I had to meet, which is like most of the people in this room. So, So it was, I just owe him a great debt. I had to get away from botany for a minute and do other things, and I've come back in recent years. But there's some traits that have stuck with me, and they came from Richard. And one of them is whenever I go hiking or camping or anywhere out in the wild, I make a meticulous list of every single species that I see. People were talking about he didn't just look at the rare stuff. He wanted to know everything. And I just remember a moment when we were collecting specimens for the tree book. I think somewhere near Sassavie, and him and I were crouched over a Descarenia pinnata, and I can't remember who it was. Somebody said, "Oh, it must be a dry year," because we're looking at this weed. So, but we just looked at each other, and he looked at me, and he knew that I got it, and I knew that he cared, and it was we had that bond. And that's something I'll never forget, and I'll miss him.
Thank you, Jared. Now I'd like to invite someone that's come a long way to be here from southeastern Arizona, Peter. Peter, there he is. Do you want to come on up?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
My tear ducts are empty. My cheeks are aching. I said, we gotta do this more often. So, just to start, I could use a little help. If you would just say the words, "we know," when I go like this, that would help me get going. I'm not a botanist.
We know.
but I've grown native plants for many, many years.
We know.
And I might have a bit for you a little later. I met Richard when I was working at Desert Survivors. I was the president of the Native Plant Society. That's not a big thing, because once they make you president, it's hard to get out. But I just liked him right away, and he was all the things you all said, but his, I don't know, he just grabbed you. And one day he said, you should come with me to Cabeza Prieta. I've got to do several arroyos there. And I told Tony Burgess, I get to go with Richard to the Cabeza Prieta. And he said, he's going to work your ass off. On the way to the Cabeza, he started regaling me stories how when Linnaeus went out to the field, trumpets played, people sang, and I'm looking around the truck looking for trumpets. And we did these arroyos after the monsoon. It was September 1991, maybe, something like that. And a screwdriver, and the stories of the 6-foot-tall plant presses. Yes, okay, we're out in the Cabeza Prieta, and the press got bigger and bigger, and I'm making little notes each time we push something into that press. Anyway, it was fantastic, and he taught me so much, so gently. So, I think it was Richard who finally got me to realize that, yeah, man, the desert is beautiful. The desert is beautiful. And I started realizing it, and it became something I had said a lot, and I have to thank Richard. And I think you know it, and this is your small part, but say it pianissimo. The desert is beautiful. And Richard Felger was fantastic.
Peters, perhaps better known as Petey Mesquite. Jody Lee, would you come on up? There she is. Thank you, Jody.
Get this down to a level where I can see over it. So I first came to Southern Arizona in 1977 as a graduate student and quickly became involved with Ray Turner and Paul Martin up on Tumamoc Hill, doing lots of field trips and things. And Richard and I were in the same circle of people, but we didn't interact much. And that kind of stayed consistent until, so in 1984, I spent part of the summer in central Mexico with Paul Martin, and then flew back to Tucson and went to the Grand Canyon with Ray Turner to do a trip down the Grand Canyon, doing the repeat photography that Ray is so famous for doing. And we had a horrible accident in the Grand Canyon. I ended up in the hospital and moved back to Los Angeles, where I was from, to kind of lick my wounds because the doctor said, that's your second field-related accident. You're not having another one because you probably won't survive. So Ray said, whatever you do, if you want to come back and do more repeat photography, I'll put you to work. So I taught school in Los Angeles for a year, which was fun, but it wasn't field work. It wasn't working with Ray and Paul and doing all those great things. So in the summer of '86, I dutifully, got myself back here. I had a place to stay. It was great. I worked all summer for Ray and actually got to take a couple of short trips, but mostly worked in the little teeny tiny photography unit up on the hill, which was right next to where Paul's office was. Some of you may know it, with the little red window. And the following year, I went back to LA and then came back the next summer, but the people I'd stayed with had moved. So Ray said, well, there's an empty office in the big lab. If you don't tell anybody, you could stay there. So I moved my little backpack and my little bedroll into the lower shelf in the office. And Paul Martin was not happy. He was the director at that time. And he came to me and he said, so you're sleeping up here on the hill? And I said, yeah. And it was really, I loved it because in the mornings, it was an awesome place to be. There were all these animals that would come up. At that time, the water fountain had an overflow right outside the main window. And so you could see all these wonderful animals come. And there was, right outside Paul's office, there was a shower. And so really early in the morning, I'd go out, take a shower, and, shower and towel off and get back in the lab before, of course, there weren't many houses down on that side of the hill at that time. Anyway, Paul was not happy with this arrangement. So he started trying to figure out what else we could do. So Paul and Ray talked, and Ray called Dick Felger. Now I knew Dick. We had been, for 10, 12 years, we had associated peripherally. But we'd never really spent any time together. I don't know what Ray said to Paul, to Dick, but Dick agreed to let me stay at his house. Now all I knew was mostly reputation. I knew a lot of grad students and other folks that had worked with Dick, and I was like, really? But I went and stayed at Dick's house by the university, and he was the kindest host to a young woman who was really struggling with getting better after a really debilitating accident. It was 1.5 years later, and I was still struggling hard. And he was generous to a fault. Even when he had to leave for a few days because he had a trip planned, he just left me the keys to his house. And, I had to promise to water the plants, which was no easy task. But he was a kind and generous soul. A side of him I had never seen or heard about from anybody who knew him. And so I have lots of peripheral memories of Dick and some really, really kind memories of breakfast together and stories over tea.
When I retired from the University of Arizona, I moved to Silver City. One of the major reasons I moved to Silver City was Richard Felger and Zilka Schneider. But way more important than that was the reason I stayed was because of Richard and Zilka and our friendship. So I'd like to share just a little slice, maybe it's right that I'm last, because I'd like to share a slice of life in Silver City after Richard moved from Tucson. This is written in free verse, so I will read it. Bill, its title is Pax et Prosopis, the way Richard signed many of his letters, Peace and Mesquite, for Richard Felger. My gardens grow rich because of Richard. He told me not to buy an old house. When I did, he said, fit the crop to the land, plant natives that match soils and climate, draw in the local pollinators. I'm going to skip half the stanzas here for effort of time, but he potlucked with our gang of usual suspects, celebrated birthdays of books as well as people. Dogs, emus, horses, chickens presided. Greenhouse tours followed by food. Fitting scenes for giving thanks. On Richard and Zilka's deck one night, because he and buddies sought a forum, we agreed to meet, eat salad, talk writing. We crafted a small writers' group of friends. weekly fitting practice to our purposes. And I mean all of our purposes, not just Richard's. They suited all of us. He never stopped teaching. We remember his quips and comments, repeated over and over until we'd say, "Richard, we have heard that before." Now, how fitting that his phrases still echo. If I had more time, the essay would be shorter. How many species have you eaten today? Me? 27. Better done than perfect, though perfect was the aim. It's not what you get into a chapter, it's what they don't take out, borrowed from Chuck Bowden. And my personal fave, Anne, hedge your bets with intercropping. He sent relentless queries before dawn. Writing was important, finishing paramount. Landmark science to beat poetry. He began what passes to next generations, fitting mentorship into posterity. Richard believed in past become present. Ancients had fun too, he would say. Finding kindred joy with place, plants, critters, and more. He was a time traveler, fitting in one name, only to forget a person's name. Like ecatones in succession, like seasons cycling round, like his perennial no-till desert crops, Richard's remarkable work flows on. Fit the crop to the land, he said. Mark this man and his legacy.
A beautiful ending. And I'd like to make it the ending. If there is someone that was left off the list here that would like to say a short comment now would be the time to sneak it in. And if not, I'd like to thank our speakers, Silka, our two Sues, Mark, Gilberto, and Ben for preparing things. We're soon going to retire to the herbarium. Before I do that, though, we'll have some things out there, and there's something that I want to add here, and someone else mentioned it. This is Richard's book of poetry, which he was really determined to get out there. And it's a really fine thing, and you can just find it on the internet. It's called Dark Horses and Little Turtles. It's at times it'll make you cry, and other times it'll make you laugh. There's a hilarious little play in here involving a lecherous old turtle. There you go. And so I'll bring that over to the herbarium so you can have a peek. Wait.
There's a copy over there.
There's a copy? Yeah, this is the one from there. But I'll put it back. And I'd like to ask Shelley. Is Shelley here? Well, maybe she's not. Yeah, there she is. She's going to give this. It looks like that is the ending. So thank you for coming, and we may all retire to the herbarium.
Okay. Oh, you know what? I should make small pieces, I think.
That's too small.
This cake was made in honor of Richard Felger, who was a peaceful plant expert. And he always signed his emails, Pox at Prosopis. Prosopis is mesquite, and so here's a mesquite leaf and some mesquite beans.
It's just like a chair.
Record,